Imagine this: a quiet street, a warm pub, or a luxury townhouse. Ordinary places. But within minutes, they became scenes of horror. A devoted father lured to his death. A young man killed in under 10 seconds in front of dozens of witnesses. A man so feared in Glasgow that people whispered his name, found buried in a shallow grave. These are not movies. These are not legends. These are real cases, real lives, shattered by violence that shocked Britain to its core. Tonight, we're pulling back the curtain on some of the UK's most shocking murders, the revenge plots, the criminal networks, and the moments that turn normal nights into crime scenes that would haunt entire communities. Buckle in, because once you hear what really happened, you won't look at these streets the same way again. Kilburn Drive in Wigan sat still just another icy Thursday night. Minutes later, the quiet shattered. One moment turned an ordinary cul-de-sac into chaos. What had begun years earlier with a swipe on a dating app had spiraled into darkness, a plan so meticulous that seasoned detectives would later call it one of the most shocking cases they'd ever seen. This is the tale of a Tinder meetup that sparked one of Britain's most disturbing murders, and how a chilling scheme was finally exposed on Kilburn Drive in Shevington, Wigan. The evening was tranquil, that winter kind of calm where streets are empty and windows glow as families settle in. Then, something snapped the silence. A neighbor spotted something at the bottom of a drive, a shape, motionless. At first, they couldn't tell what they were seeing. Within minutes, emergency crews flooded the road. Police sealed the area while firefighters and paramedics tried to understand the threat. Fearing chemicals, officers in hazmat gear worked beneath floodlights. Only up close did the truth emerge. The man was 38-year-old Liam Smith. He'd been shot in the face. Afterwards, chemicals had been used in an attempt to obliterate evidence. Detectives later said they'd never seen anything like it. The combination gunshot trauma, corrosive substances, and a deliberate effort to degrade the body told investigators this wasn't random. It was planned, cold, calculated. But in those first hours, the question was simple: who wanted Liam Smith dead? He wasn't on police radar. He had no known enemies. By midnight, Greater Manchester Police's major incident team had opened a murder probe starting with almost nothing. No witnesses, no clear motive, just a horrifying scene and the acrid sting of chemicals in the air. Liam's name raced through headlines, but behind the tape was a man whose life didn't resemble the violence that ended it. At 38, Liam was a father of two young boys, a devoted dad who, family said, would do anything for those he loved. Friends called him generous, the sort to give you the shirt off his back. He lived in Shevington, Wigan, and ran LPS Electrical and Build Ltd, a small firm that kept him busy and allowed him to provide. He had served as a soldier, a chapter that shaped a strong, quiet character. In the days after his death, tributes piled up, flowers and cards lined Kilburn Drive. Neighbors left notes about a kind, dependable man. His sister Gemma called him her rock, always there, no matter what. Nothing suggested a life that attracts violence. No criminal ties. No feuds. He was a dad, a brother, a friend, apparently in the wrong place at the wrong time. Or so it seemed. As detectives dug into his past, one name surfaced. Rachel Fulstow, a woman Liam had met briefly in 2019 via a dating app. A single encounter long forgotten by Liam, but one that became the root of a deadly chain. For investigators, it raised the first crucial question: could something from years ago have returned to destroy his life? Back in 2019, Liam Smith and Rachel Fulstow crossed paths in a chance digital match. They connected on Tinder and met in York. Dinner, drinks, then a hotel. For Liam, it was just another night he moved on, unaware that this brief meeting would resurface in the worst way. Later, Rachel claimed the night hadn't been consensual. She stopped short of calling it rape and never reported it. In fact, the very next day, she had lunch with Liam before heading home. Nothing then suggested their meeting would one day be twisted into the motive for murder. 2 years later, Rachel Fulstow's life was tangled with Michael Hilla, a man with a dangerous reputation. Hilla, from Sheffield, dealt drugs and prided himself on staying invisible. He knew burner phones, clone plates, how to erase trails. Outwardly, he played the slick success story, flash cars, swagger, a hard edge. Behind doors, he was volatile and controlling. Rachel, who'd worked in luxury hotels, was drawn into his orbit. The relationship curdled jealousy, manipulation, control. Hiller's obsession deepened when Rachel told him about her one-night encounter with Liam Smith. Whether driven by guilt, fear of losing Hilla, or something else, Rachel's account fueled his anger. He convinced himself Liam had to be punished. But this wasn't just revenge over a past meeting. Hiller's ego, his need to dominate, twisted the story. He saw himself as judge and executioner. Rachel didn't stop him. She also didn't openly push him. Detectives would later conclude that their bond laid the groundwork for the unthinkable. Hiller's sway grew. Rachel's silence, whether fear, loyalty, or manipulation, let it take hold. A troubled relationship was about to become something far worse. A partnership tethered to one of Britain's most shocking crimes. Music. The decision to kill Liam wasn't sudden. The plot began quietly months before the murder night. Detectives later learned preparation started by May 2022. From then on, Michael Hille and Rachel Fulsto showed disturbing patience and detail. Rachel's role was subtle but pivotal. She researched Liam online, his company, LPS Electrical and Build Limited, his personal life, his address. Her digital footprint revealed chilling searches. What is premeditated? How long does it take for a car to burn completely? She looked up Mitsubishi Shogun models, the vehicle Hille would later drive, and even checked Wigan weather for the chosen day. Meanwhile, Hille prepared with precision that shocked investigators once mapped. He sourced blank-firing guns and converted them to shoot live rounds. In his Sheffield cellar, he practiced with improvised targets. He bought corrosive chemicals, sulfuric acid and soda crystals to destroy evidence and distort the scene. By early November, the plan moved into action. On the 2nd of November 2022, Hille made his first Sheffield to Wigan run, not to strike, but to conduct hostile reconnaissance. In a Mitsubishi Shogun already wearing clone plates, he sat watching Liam's home for hours. CCTV later showed the vehicle nestled on a quiet street, almost invisible. Over the next weeks, the pair fine-tuned the operation. He secured weapons, chemicals, and additional false plates, one reading R20-0, a detail that would become crucial. This wasn't random. Every move was calculated. They waited for the perfect moment. Liam alone, vulnerable. By the 24th of November, everything was set. Hille left Sheffield with the cloned plates. By late morning, he was on Kilburn Drive in Shevington, parked where he could see Liam's house without being obvious. He'd brought a converted blank-firing pistol, sulfuric acid, soda crystals, and a high-vis jacket to pass as a workman. For 10 hours, he waited. Neighbors later remembered the vehicle but thought nothing of it. CCTV from a nearby home captured glimpses of Hille stepping out, adjusting his high-vis, pacing, rehearsing. As darkness fell, he moved. Just after 6:30 p.m., wearing a head torch to lure Liam outside, as if about a work issue, he approached the door. Moments later, Liam stepped out. What followed was recorded only by audio, a single gunshot on nearby CCTV microphones. Hille fired at close range, striking Liam in the face. Liam collapsed by his drive. Hille returned after circling the block. From the Shogun, he pulled containers of corrosive chemicals and poured sulfuric acid and soda crystals over Liam's body, a brutal bid to strip forensics and confound investigators. Within minutes, he was gone. He later dumped and burned the Shogun to erase traces. Kilburn Drive reeled. Emergency services arrived to a scene of white residue and chemical fumes. Detectives quickly understood. Not random, but premeditated and precise, unlike anything they'd seen in years. In the hours after the killing, Hille drove back to Yorkshire, leaving devastation behind. The Shogun, now crucial evidence, was torched. The clone R22 plates destroyed with it. He wanted no trace. Rachel played her part, shaping alibis. While Hille executed the plan, she kept her digital footprint quiet, knowing phones would be scrutinized. But her earlier searches, Wigan forecasts, burning vehicles, Liam's business already existed. Days later, rather than lying low, they acted as if nothing had happened. They flew to Jamaica for a 2-week holiday. Photos later recovered showed them horseback in the sea, smiling as if Kilburn Drive had never happened. For investigators, this mattered. While GMP pieced together the puzzle, Hille and Fulsto drank cocktails at sunset. The apparent lack of remorse and the arrogance of thinking they could outrun justice would loom large in court. Back in the UK, officers sifted hundreds of hours of CCTV from the 24th of November 2022, looking for anomalies near Kilburn Drive. Then they found the Mitsubishi Shogun parked nearly 10 hours, barely moving, leaving soon after the attack. Police appealed for information about the vehicle. Every detail mattered, including its false registration R22A. The break came when South Yorkshire police reported stopping that exact Shogun weeks earlier, Michael Hille at the wheel. From that moment, the case tightened. Checks into Hiller's background revealed large-scale cannabis production and a lifestyle built around burner phones and staying off-grid. Even so, he'd left a digital scent. Phone records placed him in Wigan on the day when the couple returned from Jamaica. The net was closing. Hiller was arrested in January 2023. Folsto first treated as a witness lead repeatedly in the interview. Then detectives pulled her online activity, searches for Liam's firm, for the materials and timings already described. She wasn't an innocent bystander. She had helped locate and set up the target. By February, she too was arrested. Their meticulous planning had created the very trail used to bring them down. For Liam's family, the 24th of November 2022 shattered everything. In the days that followed, their quiet street was a forest of blue lights, forensic tents, and camera crews. Behind the coverage was a family trying to understand how their son, brother, and father could be taken so brutally. Liam's parents, Julia and Phil Smith, made public appeals. At a press conference, Julia broke down, pleading for information. Phil, voice shaking, called the killing savage and senseless, saying the family was haunted by how he died. Two little boys lost their dad, the center of their world. Friends and neighbors spoke of his devotion, always working, always present. Now those children will grow up without their adoring father. As weeks turned to months, grief deepened, worsened by the horrendous details emerging about the way Liam was killed. The calculated cruelty was irreconcilable with the man they knew, a hard-working father and son. Justice could never bring him back. But as they sat through the trial, they held to one hope: that truth, however painful, would ensure those responsible could never harm again. On the 20th of July 2023, the trial of Michael Hille and Rachel Folsto opened at Minchell Street Crown Court, Manchester. The gallery was packed. Press, family, and officers who had spent months unpicking the 24th of November 2022. Prosecutor Jason Pitter KC alleged premeditated murder under the guise of vigilante justice. He set out how Hille and Folsto plotted for months. The defense pushed back. Hille admitted manslaughter but denied murder, claiming a misguided sense of justice after Folsto said sex in 2019 hadn't been consensual, arguing passion, not planning. Folsto denied involvement, insisting Hille acted alone. The prosecution's mosaic her searches and other evidence left jurors unconvinced. After 6 weeks, the jury returned unanimous guilty verdicts. On the 25th of August 2023, sentences were passed. Michael Hille, 39, of Sheffield, life imprisonment, minimum 33 years. Rachel Folsto, 37, of York, life imprisonment, minimum 30 years. As the judge spoke, Liam's family wept months of waiting, finally an end. What do you think of the case and the sentences? Share your thoughts below. If you want more real UK crime stories told like this, subscribe and turn on notifications. There's always another case. It began with a smile. A couple once pictured on yachts, cocktails in hand, under Mexican sun. Days later, a body in a Manchester townhouse tortured, the walls washed red. No forced entry, no obvious motive. Just one woman who knew too much and a seance that changed everything. This is the story of Thomas and Colleen Campbell, and how a hidden life collapsed in on itself. To outsiders, they looked like they'd made it. Matching blacked-out cars on the drive. A brand new extension with mosaic floors, a private garden gym. Designer outfits, high-end watches, holidays most people only dream of. Publicly, Thomas called himself a personal trainer. Colleen worked part-time at Madeline. They were seen at the school gates, then on Instagram sun-drenched photos from Cancun, Majorca, and Sharm el-Sheikh. One trip alone cost £10,000 cash. The truth sat beneath. Money, dirty money kept off the banks and cycled through things that shine. Between 2012 and 2016, funds were pushed through car finance and property upgrades. Flash Motors, BMWs, Audis, a 6.3L Mercedes AMG, all in their names. Both families were drawn in: parents, siblings, cousins, woven into a small criminal ecosystem designed to hide wealth in plain sight. By 2018, it caught up. A joint police operation led to charges for concealing criminal property. Colleen avoided jail. Thomas didn't. He served 2 years. When he got out, the marriage was over. She stayed in the house. He moved on: new partner, new routines, the same old shadows. 2 neighbors. They were simply a separated couple co-parenting. Inside the circles they once influenced, loyalties slipped. And someone outside the family began watching Thomas with care. That attention soon turned into something far worse. Word spread quickly: Thomas was seeing someone new. In his world, drugs, reprisals, long memories that mattered, because her ex was John Belfield, a name murmured in certain rooms, tied to organized crime and high-level classes supply. Not just a rival and active threat. Belfield didn't rage, he planned. Almost immediately, he set wheels in motion. Not a hot-headed reaction but a professional scheme. Hurt Thomas, and take whatever cash, drugs, or valuables were in reach. It started with a message. Belfield reached out to Colleen Campbell on Instagram. They'd never spoken, but something clicked. Over days they exchanged 68 messages and 35 calls. Prosecutors later said Belfield used her. Others argued she knew exactly what she was doing. Colleen fed him details, Thomas's van, his house number, when he'd be home. A tracker was discussed, more on that in a moment. To outsiders, it looked like old acquaintances chatting. But police would later recover footage of Belfield and Colleen meeting for 25 minutes in her back garden the day before Thomas died. The plot was set, the target chosen. All they needed was the right moment. In the run-up to the murder, preparations intensified. The 27th of June, 5 days before the attack, Belfield, Cleworth, and Stephen met at the Boat and Horses pub in Oldham. CCTV shows them at a table. What looked like small talk was something else. Under the table, one mimed attaching a tracker. Later that day, the device went on small, discreet, stuck beneath Thomas's van as he waited at the school. From then on, surveillance was easy. Every journey logged. Thomas had no idea. Colleen, prosecutors said, added context. When he'd be out, when he'd be alone, when the door would open. The 30th of June, the team pulled up outside his house but aborted. Not the night. 2 days later, they came back. 3 men, a Vauxhall combo van, parked on a neighbor's drive just after 11 p.m. Street CCTV would later show them waiting silent in the van. They weren't dressed for burglary, no shouted demands, no visible weapons until they moved. The plan wasn't to smash in. It was to wait, watch, and pounce the second the door opened. At 11:06 p.m., Thomas stepped out. Before we reach the 2 hours of violence that ended Thomas Campbell's life, rewind to a moment prosecutors later highlighted as a signal. The 29th of June, 3 days before the murder, Colleen Campbell was caught on CCTV in Ashton-under-Lyne, striding across a residential street with a claw hammer. She didn't hide it. One woman connected to her ex's wider circle was struck, then Colleen walked away. Not robbery, not random. Personal, a flare-up in a web of jealousy, reputation, shifting allegiances. At the time, police treated it as a standalone assault. At the murder trial, it returned. Prosecutors said it showed her mindset volatile, active, capable of direct violence. The hammer never appeared in the murder, but the mentality, the readiness to escalate did. She was already in contact with Belfield, already passing details. Now she was attacking in daylight. To the world, she looked like a grieving mum. In the shadows, she was aligning with a plan. And the man she once loved was in real danger. The first strike came as the door opened. Thomas barely spoke before he was hauled inside. The door shut. Lights stayed off. No neighbor saw a thing. For nearly 2 hours, he was held in his own home, stripped, restrained, assaulted in near total silence. What happened inside was brutal by any measure. There were 61 injuries, punches, stamps, stab wounds. At one point, boiling water was poured over his buttocks and legs, punishment long associated with gang reprisals. Police later called it a prolonged, targeted assault designed to cause pain. He was dragged from room to room, drag marks scoring the floors. When paramedics arrived, he was naked but for socks. A house once filled with polished finishes had become a blood-soaked crime scene. No broken glass. No alarm. Just one neighbor's doorbell camera capturing 3 men stepping in. Whoever did it knew exactly how to get close, and precisely when to strike. Nothing of value was taken, no cash, no jewelry, not even the designer items in plain view. This wasn't robbery. It was humiliation, pain, dominance. Forensics later confirmed multiple attackers, different DNA, different soul patterns, overlapping violence. None spoke a word. By the time Thomas was pronounced dead, the attackers were gone. No vehicle captured leaving. No witnesses came forward. A man dead in his hallway, and silence. That silence broke days later, with someone claiming he'd spoken from beyond the grave. 4 days after the murder, Thomas's mother answered a knock. Colleen Campbell stood there. She said she'd seen a psychic, that Thomas had come through during a seance and that he had things to say. She then gave a detailed account. Boiling water, facial wounds, the number of men. She traced a slash across her own cheek while describing it. Those details weren't public. Not the boiling, not the cuts, not the head count. Only detectives or the killers knew. His mother listened, then went straight to police. That moment proved pivotal. Investigators checked timelines. By then, Colleen's phone had already been flagged. Data showed contact with John Belfield on the night messages and calls, some hours after Thomas was found. The psychic explanation collapsed. What she framed as spiritual knowledge was, in truth, forensic knowledge. Prosecutors later argued the seance story wasn't grief, it was cover, a way to explain how she knew what no one else could have known because she'd heard it from someone who was there. Behind the scenes, GMP had already launched a full investigation Operation Ravensburg revealing surveillance, planning, and collusion spanning weeks. Over 200 witnesses interviewed. More than 3,000 exhibits logged. CCTV from street corners, shop fronts, neighboring houses, ours analyzed frame by frame. They traced the Vauxhall van, found the pub meeting days earlier, matched times, movements, phone pings. Every call to Belfield, every message, every location slotted into place. Footage from Colleen's own home showed her with Belfield in the garden, deep in talk under darkness. The tracker told its story attached carefully to avoid detection, logging routes for days while Colleen provided context. Even after the killing, she stayed in touch with Belfield. A final call came hours after Thomas's body was found. The pattern pointed to a joint plan. Arrests followed. Reese Stephen, 29, was picked up after forensic teams linked his DNA to a VW caddy believed used in the getaway, then traced him to a Manchester address. He was arrested on suspicion of murder. Next, Stephen Clueworth, 38, detained in Haywood after CCTV and phone data placed him at key planning meets, including the boat and horses. His early stage role was enough. Then police turned to Colleen Campbell, arrested at her home in Clayton. Her contacts with Belfield, combined with the seance details, were sufficient to bring her in. One name remained absent. By the time charges were filed, John Belfield had vanished. Police raided addresses across Greater Manchester and beyond. He was gone, no phone, no trace, just whispers of a fake passport, burner cells, loyal helpers. Detectives believed he choreographed the lot, the surveillance, the ambush, the method, the team, the timing, even the cleanup. And still, when others were charged, he slipped the net. A European arrest warrant went out. Borders were flagged, Interpol listed him. Nothing. The Crown built its case without him. Tracker data, Colleen's links, the CCTV web. For a while, it looked like he'd stay out of reach. Then, summer 2023, a break. Belfield had fled to Suriname, on South America's northeast coast. He was arrested by local police under a false name and held 4,500 miles away. In June 2025, he was finally returned to the UK. GMP confirmed his arrival. The long absence ended, the case unfroze. He now faces charges over planning and ordering the killing, proceedings set to resume with Belfield to stand trial alone. The 12th of July 2023, at Bolton Crown Court, the trial of 3 defendants concluded charges: murder, manslaughter, conspiracy to rob. The prosecution's case was weeks of surveillance, phone records, and forensics, not a burglary gone wrong, but a calculated ambush. They walked the jury through the evidence already outlined here: the tracker, the pub meetings, the van, the calls. They said the attack was executed with military precision, informed by Colleen Campbell, the toxic ex. Reese Stephen, they argued, entered with 2 others. Doorbell footage showed 3 men following Thomas inside. All 3, the Crown said, participated directly in the torture leading to murder. The defense tried to split planning from violence. Colleen claimed she thought it was a robbery no one meant for Thomas to die. Clueworth insisted he wasn't present when the killing happened. Only Stephen offered no defense. The jury rejected all of it and returned their verdicts. Reese Stephen, 29, guilty of murder and conspiracy to rob, life, minimum 37 years. Stephen Clueworth, 38, guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to rob, 12 years. Colleen Campbell, 38, guilty of manslaughter and conspiracy to rob. The judge said she set the ball rolling. 13 years, with at least 2/3 to be served before parole can be considered. As sentencing was read, one figure remained outside the dock, but not for long. Soon he too will face a court. What did you think of the case and the sentences? Tell us in the comments. As for John Belfield, proceedings are ongoing. A trial will decide what comes next. For more real UK crime stories told like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case. It was nearly closing time. Lights dimmed, music fading out. In a West London bar, The last drinks were being poured. Nothing seemed unusual. A few dozen people leaned against tables and walls, some ready to leave, others stretching the night a little longer. Among them was a 21-year-old man, relaxed and chatting with friends. Then, a stranger crossed the room. What happened next took less than 10 seconds, and by the time anyone processed it, the man was gone. This is the story of a young life cut short without warning, and how his killer became Britain's most wanted fugitive. Before we dive in, leave a comment about the case. It helps more people discover the story. Josh Hanson was just 21. He lived with his mum in Kingsbury, northwest London, and worked as a roads planner for the local council. He was known as polite, hardworking, deeply close to his family. He loved his job, often starting early, always making time for friends and for his mum. His sister, Brooke, described him as thoughtful, the kind of person who would drop everything if you needed him. That Saturday night, he was doing what thousands of young Londoners do every weekend, a night out with his girlfriend and mates. Nothing unusual, just a quick drink before work the next week. On the other side of the city, Shane O'Brien moved in very different circles. At 27, he was already well known to police, linked to organized crime and part of a European network. Those who knew him described him as careful, calculated, not loud or flashy, but someone with reach and resources. He had a daughter, kept a low profile, and frequented boxing gyms and late-night clubs. There was no connection between the two men, no shared friends, no feud, no history, just two people who happened to be in the same place that night. It was the early hours of Sunday the 11th of October 2015. The Ree Bar in Eastcote, West London, was winding down. Around 40 people remained, scattered between tables and the bar. CCTV captured Josh entering with his girlfriend and friends, standing near a wall, chatting quietly. Across the room, O'Brien sat with his own group, wearing a Canada Goose jacket. CCTV confirmed there was no interaction between them, no words, no glances, nothing. O'Brien blended in, drinking casually, nothing about him raising alarm. At about 1:10 a.m., O'Brien rose and crossed the floor toward Josh. They exchanged brief words, heated, though police never fully disclosed what was said. Seconds later, O'Brien reached into his jacket pocket, pulled a Stanley-style knife, and slashed Josh across the neck and chest in a single, brutal motion. The wound was 37 centimeters long, starting just behind Josh's ear and cutting diagonally downward. The entire attack lasted less than 10 seconds. Most people didn't realize what had happened until they saw the blood. An off-duty nurse rushed over, trying to stem the bleeding, but Josh collapsed almost immediately. He was pronounced dead shortly after paramedics arrived. O'Brien didn't panic. He didn't run. He simply turned and walked out of the front door, calm and composed, before disappearing into the night. CCTV caught him leaving the bar, heading down Field End Road. Within minutes, the bar became a crime scene. Witnesses were shocked, struggling to piece together what they had just seen. Police arrived quickly, cordoning off Field End Road in both directions, taking dozens of statements, and collecting forensic evidence from the blood-soaked floor and smashed glasses. By morning, detectives already knew who they were looking for, but O'Brien was already gone. In the hours after the murder, he didn't return to his home in Ladbroke Grove. Instead, he relied on a criminal network skilled at moving people quietly. Over 2 days, he traveled from London to Kent. Investigators later learned he arrived at Biggin Hill Airport, a private airfield in southeast London, where he boarded a privately chartered jet to the Netherlands under a false name. By the time police issued their first appeal, he was already out of the country. The escape was clean, organized, professional, and became one of the most criticized details of the case. From the Netherlands, O'Brien's trail went cold. He used no bank cards, checked into no hotels, left no digital footprint. Everything was cash. Everything was hidden. To stay off the grid that long, he had serious backing. For the police, the case had just turned international. Within days, his name was added to Europol's most wanted list. The National Crime Agency and Met Police circulated his picture across Europe, offered rewards starting at £10,000, later raised to £50,000. But O'Brien wasn't acting alone. Detectives soon learned he was being bankrolled and protected by organized criminal networks. They provided him safe houses, burner phones, fake IDs. Leads trickled in sightings in Germany, the Netherlands, France. At one point, intelligence placed him in Dubai, under the protection of serious players in organized crime. But each time police followed up, he was gone again. Then, In February 2017 came a near miss. Czech police arrested a man named Enzo Melancelli in Prague for assault and criminal damage. He had long hair, a beard, and a new tattoo, the giant owl clutching a skull, covering a previous mark. Czech authorities released him on bail. Weeks later, investigators realized Melancelli was a Brian. But by then, he had disappeared again. More sightings followed, Gibraltar, Nice, Prague once more, but he remained just ahead of the hunt. He moved at night, paid in cash, stayed hidden. The trail stayed warm but never closed until he made a mistake. While police worked the international angles, Josh's family launched their own relentless campaign. His mom, Tracy Hansen, became the driving force. She printed thousands of wanted posters, laminated them herself, mailed them across the UK and abroad. She pushed O'Brien's face on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, reminding the public this killer was still free. Every anniversary, she held vigils, lit candles, gave interviews. On what would have been Josh's birthday, Tracy and his sister Brooke even completed a skydive to keep the case alive. She walked London streets, wearing a sandwich board printed with Josh's photo and O'Brien's details, handing out leaflets at train stations. She said she wasn't fundraising, she just needed people to see. By March 2019, almost 3.5 years later, the break finally came. In Romania, O'Brien had been living under the alias Enzo Melancelli, the same identity he used in Prague. This time, Romanian police moved fast. In broad daylight, plainclothed officers rushed him, forced him to the ground, and arrested him on the street. Witnesses said he didn't resist. His fingerprints, tattoos, and records confirmed the match. This time, there would be no bail. He was held under armed guard, extradited to the UK, and landed at Heathrow, where he appeared in court for the first time since the night of the killing. For Josh's family, the call came quickly. The man they had been hunting for over 3 years was finally caught. The trial began later that year at the Old Bailey. The CCTV evidence was overwhelming. Jurors saw O'Brien approach, strike, and walk away. There was no doubt about who had done it. The defense argued it was a moment of madness, not premeditated murder. But prosecutors showed he had carried the knife into the bar, and that he fled the country within hours, using criminal contacts and fake documents. They described it as an unprovoked, deliberate killing in a crowded bar. After a short deliberation, the jury found O'Brien guilty of murder. In October 2019, he was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 26 years. The judge called the attack grotesque and savage. For Josh's family, it was the justice they had waited for years to see. The man who took Josh's life in under 10 seconds will now spend decades behind bars. What do you think of the sentence? Tell us below. And if you want more UK crime stories told like this, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case. It started with a dog walk. A cold December morning, a narrow woodland path outside West Calder. At first, the dog walker thought they'd found animal bones, weathered and poking through the soil. But as police arrived, the truth emerged. This wasn't an animal. The area was sealed off. Forensics combed the ground inch by inch. What they found wasn't a full skeleton, just fragments. A skull, part of a spine. No clothing, no wallet, no way to tell who it was or what had happened. Whoever had buried the body had made sure this would stay hidden. For weeks, forensic teams worked silently. Then, a name surfaced, a name whispered in Scotland's underworld but not heard in months. Martin Hamilton. A man feared across Glasgow and Edinburgh, linked to torture, rape, extortion, and some of the darkest crimes Scotland had ever seen. This is the story of how he built his reign, and how it ended in a shallow grave. Hamilton grew up in Maryhill, northwest Glasgow, just streets from the Cranston Hill police station. But from early on, the law never intimidated him. Other schoolkids knew to step aside when he boarded a bus. They called him unpredictable. Some called him sadistic. Everyone called him dangerous. By 17, he was already carrying weapons. In 1984, he was jailed for assault and intent to cause serious injury. He was short, heavyset, quick-talking, always on edge, but never weak. He didn't run in crews. He pledged loyalty to no one. He operated alone, moving through Glasgow's criminal ecosystem like a lone wolf. Drugs, intimidation, robbery, he touched all of it. What set him apart wasn't ambition. It was cruelty. Hamilton targeted the vulnerable, the addicts, those in debt, people too scared to speak. He used sexual violence as a tool of power, raping and humiliating victims to control them. By the early 1990s, he'd already survived 2 shootings outside his home. The press gave him a nickname that stuck, Scotland's most hated man, and he didn't deny it. In 1992, he was jailed again, this time for a violent attempted robbery of a building society. Armed with knives and an imitation firearm, Hamilton and 3 others lay in wait. The police had been tipped off. The job collapsed within minutes. Hamilton had learned something: if you scare victims enough, they won't testify. And for years, it worked. By the late 1990s, Hamilton was burning bridges even within Glasgow's underworld. He crossed some of the city's most powerful figures, including legendary crime boss Arthur Thompson. A botched contract killing had severed the last of his alliances, so he moved east to Edinburgh. The capital's west side was fractured, smaller players, fewer enforcers. Perfect for someone like Hamilton. He settled in Broomhouse, Wester Highley's, and Sighthill, and then went to work. Police in Edinburgh didn't know what they were dealing with. Their Glasgow counterparts hadn't warned them. Soon, a wave of violence swept through the area. Hamilton didn't just deal drugs, he took over entire supply lines by force. He gave teenage dealers heroin and ecstasy, then demanded payments. If they failed, he made examples. One boy had a finger cut off. Another was nearly blinded with a teaspoon. Reports surfaced of young men beaten, scalded, sexually assaulted. Pub landlords were next. One said he paid £30,000 just to keep Hamilton away. Another tried to defy him and ended up shot in a ditch. Finally, police responded with a 24/7 surveillance operation. They tracked Hamilton's movements, logged meetings, waited for him to slip. But witnesses wouldn't talk. Victims vanished or retracted statements. In months, Hamilton turned a fractured market into a personal empire, not with diplomacy, but with terror. Then came the case that broke him. A teenage couple, both 18, went to a Glasgow flat to collect drugs. What followed was a 10-hour ordeal. They were beaten until they couldn't stand, then tied and stripped. Their cheeks were pierced with a blade. Boiling water was poured over their bodies. To avoid blood on the carpet, Hamilton made them stand in the bathtub. They survived, and this time, they talked. The trial was moved to Inverness to protect them. Witness protection was among the tightest Scotland had ever seen. Their testimony changed everything. Other victims came forward, addicts, dealers, landlords, each telling similar stories, scars in the same places, identical threats, pliers, fire, sodomy at knife point. Prosecutors finally had enough. Charges were built, files locked down, courts ready. Hamilton was brought to court under armed guard. The 6-week trial at the High Court in Inverness laid out the pattern. Drugs supplied, debts enforced, punishments delivered with terrifying precision. In November 2000, Hamilton was convicted of 11 counts: drug dealing, abduction, assault, torture. The jury could not agree on multiple sexual charges, but it didn't matter, the weight of convictions was enough. The judge called him a man who took sadistic pleasure in inflicting pain and handed him life with a minimum of 9 years. It was the longest term he had faced, and the first time the system truly held him accountable. But few believed it would end there. Hamilton entered HMP Shots, where he kept his distance, not from fear, but because most inmates feared him. Guards reportedly used his name as a warning: misbehave, and you'd end up next to Hamilton. He volunteered as a listener, an inmate role meant to support vulnerable prisoners. Instead, it gave him access. Later reports accused him of using those sessions to target young offenders. One man later claimed Hamilton raped him twice, once inside, once during a supervised release meeting. Even behind bars, he stayed dangerous. But in September 2014, Hamilton was released on license. It was meant to be controlled, but to those who knew him, it was a warning sign. He quickly slid back into old habits, moving through Blackburn and Hart Hill, reconnecting with contacts. He was seen managing debts, collecting money for dealers, perhaps trying to rebuild an operation. One job stood out. A local dealer had crashed a motorbike and been hospitalized. Hamilton was asked to collect £40,000 in cocaine debts for a Liverpool crew. The money vanished. Some believed Hamilton kept it. Others said he was stalling. Either way, he'd crossed people with money, reach, and a reputation for revenge. In April 2015, he was due in Glasgow Sheriff Court for breaching his license. He never appeared. A warrant went out. Crime Stoppers offered £2,000. BBC's Crime Watch aired his face. But Hamilton was gone. No bank use, no phone pings, no sightings after the 16th of April 2015. 8 months later, The dog walker found the skull. Detectives reconstructed his last steps. They believed Hamilton hadn't been abducted on the street, he'd been lured, thinking he was in control. The prime suspect emerged, James Farrell, a Liverpool man with drug ties, living just miles from where the remains were found. Police believed Hamilton had ripped off a Liverpool crew for £40,000 and Farrell was tasked with sorting it out. Forensics, phone data, and movement records linked Farrell. He was charged with murder, accused of shooting Hamilton, inflicting sharp and blunt force trauma, burying him. He was also charged with drug offenses. But Farrell never stood trial. Diagnosed with terminal cancer, he was released and died weeks later. Hamilton's funeral was delayed 8 months while investigators worked. When it finally happened, just a handful attended. No headlines, no eulogies, no conviction ever came. Martin Hamilton, the Black Hill Butcher, had spent a life building power through fear. In the end, someone proved he wasn't untouchable. What do you think? Was this the only possible ending for a man like Hamilton? A shallow grave, no trial, no justice? Let us know in the comments. And if you want more stories from the UK underworld, subscribe, turn on notifications, and stay with us. There's always another case.